forum. Eternity of 10-second sound bites. My job is to explain to all of you the process that we will be using to use the time most efficiently and fairly. We have already drawn lots, and Roger, so that I don't trust my memory, is handing me a piece of paper that determines the order of the opening presentation. Now, the process will operate in this way. The candidates have determined order by drawing numbers. We will use the order to determine initial presentations, responses to questions, and closing statements. And if all goes as planned, each candidate will have an opportunity to be first twice and last twice, and everything in between. You can't say it's unfair. The order for opening comments, and then the order in which we'll rotate questions and then conclude, will be Lieutenant Governor Joanell Dyrstad, State Senator Jen Olson, former Commerce Commissioner Bert McKasy, Congressman Rod Grams, and my colleague in higher education, Professor Doug McFarland. Now, knowing that politicians have a way of going on and on and on and on, we have determined what we believe to be a fair and foolproof system. We have two colored signs. Colored sign number one, in bright yellow-green, will signify to the candidate that they have 15 seconds before sign number two, traffic red, saying stop, will be shown. Now, Joe Van Hubel, member of our executive committee, will be displaying the signs, both the candidates and to all of you. Now, it should be obvious then if a candidate fails to stop. And they do have 15 seconds warning. Now, Roger, I believe you have charged me with the responsibility of explaining to this group how we will proceed in the approximate next hour. Have I done that job? And I return the podium to Roger Knauss.
If I could have the candidates please come forward and sit at the table in this order. Joanell, Jen, Bert, Rod, and Doug. I'd like to first begin this evening by saying I believe that we have the finest crop of candidates for U.S. Senate in a long time. There isn't one of these people that would represent us the way we want them to represent us. With that, I'd like the first question, please. Excuse me. We'll start with Joanell, and she will get 5 minutes to speak to you. Opening statement. Joanell.
Thank you very much. Seems like I better not use too much of my time for this, but every time we do this, they cut us off and change us around in a different way. You know, you look at them like that as the first question. So, but I do want to thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and spend some time with you this evening. And also to acknowledge the hardworking state legislators that we have from the 7th District who are not able, many of them, to be here and be with you this weekend. And I just want to add one thing, that many times lately people have been saying that there's a new herb. That's not true. If you've been down there and serving in the legislature this year and working, you know that it's still the old herb. So we really need to thank those legislators. And I also wanted to acknowledge Bernie Oman. I have had the opportunity to work together with Bernie in the last few months as we've busy work on some flood relief, and really feel that he would be an outstanding congressman for the 7th District, and certainly urge you to support Bernie. I also am pleased that I can be be here to hear Dave Dernberger and his message that he is sharing with all of us. I think a valuable message. As you know, I would like to be that person that continues to serve you in the United States Senate after Dave leaves there. And I feel that my experiences as a daughter growing up in St. James, as a wife of almost 29 years now, and as a mother of 2 grown children, as a former mayor of the city of Red Wing, as a business owner, my husband Mark and I owned the corner drug in Red Wing for 26 years, and as your lieutenant governor, that these experiences really have given me the background and the knowledge that I need in order to serve you as your United States Senator. But more importantly than that background, I believe, is the vision that I have of individual responsibility, the responsibility that we have to our communities, the responsibilities that we have to our families and to our friends. Not the we generation, as has been so common lately, but the we generation, where we need to seek to assist people. We need to seek to assist people to help themselves, to move off welfare and into productive jobs, where we provide our children with educational opportunities that they can take advantage of, and where we seek to provide health care for those people who do not have it, but at the same time not giving up the health care that we all enjoy, as the Senator said. And where we seek to reduce our federal debt so that it does not hinder the development of jobs and the future of our country and of our children and of our grandchildren. We need people in government who care about the future, who care about our children and our nation, and who are not there to feed an ego or to serve some special interest. And I am convinced that I can carry Minnesotans' ideas, their hopes, and their solutions to Washington, D.C. That I'm the candidate that can win the election in November and keep this seat a Republican seat. And that I can and that I will serve Minnesotans in the best tradition, the tradition that you have become accustomed to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a real privilege to be up here, if for no other reason that I don't have to be in St. Paul. But it's great to be out here with real people that have this break from the legislative session. And it was a particular privilege also to be able to hear Senator Dyrstad, the one that all of us are aspiring to replace, and to attempt to fill some very big shoes. As I listened to him, I reflected on the fact that it was back in 1978 that I became very motivated to get involved in party politics. I was born with Republican genes, but in terms of activism, it was 1978 that did it for me. Al Quee was an inspiration to me, and it's been an honor for me that he has agreed to come on as my campaign chairman. And of course, Dave was Dave Who at that time, but he is one that has elevated our esteem, not only for him, but even for the respect for the office that he holds. I also reflected as I sat there, and it hadn't dawned on me that it was in 1978 that I was elected to my first elective office. I was one of those Republicans that was swept into office in that Minnesota massacre, only it was in city council in the little city of Dyrstad. I've gone on from that time to win. That was the first of 7 elections as city council and as mayor, and then was recruited to run for the state senate in 1982. And I've been privileged to serve in the state senate since that time. You know, it's those kinds of experiences that have taught me the lessons that I believe I bring to this challenge and to this experience. And that is that the government that's best is really the government that's closest to the people. That's where we really should resolve as many of the challenges that face us as we possibly can. But over the years, we've pushed more and more of our difficult decisions further and further away from us, to the county, to the state, to the federal level, to what is often seen as the least responsive the least effective, the least accountable level of government. I do believe that the United States of America are just that. The joining of states and the federal government is there to serve the states, not the other way around. The experience in local and state government gives me the perspective on the proper role of the federal government. I've also learned that law of unintended consequences, the government also so often pursues the course of action that brings about the opposite of the intended result. And it is a challenge not to just make the glib proposal, the political rhetoric that sounds good, that has the appeal, but rather that our proposals, our potential actions, need to be well thought out. We need to think through the consequences. Because we're paying a high price tag for the ill-advised courses of action that have been pursued as we allow these challenges to get further and further away from us. I believe in individual responsibility, and we need to reinforce that. I see the role and the opportunity of serving in the United States Senate, a very challenging one, not only to become elected, but also to serve. But it's an opportunity to educate as well, to be able to speak out on the principles and truths that I believe will draw a responsive chord across party lines. We need to have a strong voice, and I'm willing to stand on those principles of individual responsibility, free enterprise, and limited government. And try as one individual who can't do it all to bring these notions back into play in our federal government. I would be honored to be able to serve you, and I look forward to responding to your questions.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. History teaches us that the great nation states of the world were destroyed from within. That's right, not one of them fell to anyone else's marching armies. They all rotted away from within, culturally, morally, economically, and socially. And one of the cold, cruel paradoxes of history is that when a nation becomes good, it bears bountiful fruit. And when it bears bountiful fruit, its people get fat. And when they get fat, they get lazy. And when they get lazy, they turn over to government those things that previously they had done for themselves. And as there becomes a growing dependence on government, economies stagnate, productivity declines, crime rates grow, divorce rates rise. And at the root of the problem, ladies and gentlemen, is an absolute refusal by people to accept responsibility for their own actions. And families get ripped apart, and those nation states rotted away from within. And I'm convinced that if America ever falls, it too is going to be an inside job. You know, there used to be a spirit in this country when those pioneer forefathers of ours looked out across this continent from ocean to ocean and said, "Thank you, God, for the freedom and the responsibility." Now, I will take it from here with your help. And I'll be responsible for myself. And I'll take care of my family. Be responsible for my own actions. And I'll take care of those who are truly in need as well. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that spirit is not dead in this country. It's been discredited in some circles, but it's not dead. And we see it in families, and we see it in churches, and we see it in communities, we see it in hundreds of thousands of small businesses across this country. It's even present right in this room here in Moorhead tonight. But with our growing national debt, which is robbing many people of opportunities and leaving our children and their children a horrible legacy, we must do something. And with a growing lack of respect for life and including the unborn and the elderly, we must do something. And with our crime rates and divorce rates growing, and with our educational standards and performance declining, with a growing dependence on government, and our family values being discounted, we can't just sit. We have to act. What we have to do is re-energize that entrepreneurial spirit that said, thank you, God. Now with your help, I'll take it from here. And we need to strengthen the role of the family in society. In the field of education, we have to empower parents, not government. We need to give parents more choice and more say-so in the education of their children. We have to reduce the size of the government, begin to pay off the debt, reform the welfare system, and quit punishing people for being families. We must preserve quality and choice in health care, making it more affordable and more accessible for everyone. But, ladies and gentlemen, we can't do that by turning it over to the federal government lock, stock, and barrel, as Paul Wellstone and Ann Winnie and Linda Berglund and Tom Bert would have us do. We must get tougher on crime while dealing with the root causes: breakdown of family, joblessness, loss of hope and opportunity. And we can learn from history, or we can follow those other great nation states of history off into oblivion. I believe my background and experience as a small businessman, 20 years, as a husband of almost 30 years, and I think we're going to make it to August 1st of this year, notwithstanding this political campaign. And as a father of 4 terrific children, my oldest daughter, Christy McKasy, Christy, hold your hand up out there, of whom I am very proud is here with me tonight. You're going to hear from her tomorrow. I understand and have lived the family values which have made our country strong. And I understand what it takes to succeed and prosper in small business, to create opportunities for myself, to create them for my family. Although Christy's not waiting for me, she's doing real well on her own, I can guarantee you that. And I understand how an intrusive government can stifle growth and opportunity. Lastly, ladies and gentlemen, I can win in November. I can put together the organization and raise the money to beat whichever liberal candidate the DFL puts up. But, ladies and gentlemen, I can't do it without your help, and I'm here asking for it tonight. Thank you very much.
I think I'll stay seated, but I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and to talk with you tonight. I also want to thank Joanell, Roger, and Phyllis, and all who have worked so hard to put this on, and also the opportunity to be here tonight to hear from Harlan Stangeland and, of course, Senator Dave Dernberger, and to thank them and join you in thanking them for the years of service, not only just to the 7th District, but to all of Minnesota and the country as well. I also was wanting to comment on the Senator's mentioning of the great opportunities that we as Republicans have in 1994, the best opportunities that we have faced since the famed Minnesota Massacre in 1978. And those opportunities are present again this fall. But the opportunities will not become realities unless we all pitch in and work. It's not time to throw our hands up and say, well, we've tried it before and we haven't succeeded. But the opportunities we have in 1994, we should dig in our heels, put in those hours and the time and the energy and the money that it's going to take. And Republicans will turn opportunities into victories in 1994. But it's going to take the help of not only candidates, but the many, many hands that are in this room besides. So we're looking forward to your help and your support in 1994 to repeat another Minnesota Massacre that we'll remember. In this race, I believe that I am the candidate that can best make sure that we keep a strong conservative voice in Washington. When you talk about the two major issues I believe in this race is electability and leadership. On the issue of electability, I'm the candidate that has nearly 80% name ID statewide. And of those who know me, 3 out of 4 like the job I'm doing. I have favorables of over 3 to 1. And I think that has come from the leadership that I have provided in the short time that I've been in Congress. I'm still an outsider, but I know what needs to be done, and I know what I have to do in order to get that done. In the first year, I am the only freshman in Washington to get a bill passed. That was Dyrstad 93, which brought aid to many of the flood victims in the Midwest. But it didn't do it with more tax dollars. It let the private sector do what it could do best, and that is to reduce regulations and mandates to let the private sector operate better. Also in my budget bill called Families First, which I introduced last July, and after 6 months of hard work and a number of coalitions that we put together, we convinced the Republican Party to enter that as their alternative budget package to the Clinton tax and spend proposal, both in the House and in the Senate. Families First was the Republican bill, so we're very proud of the effort there. So I believe with all the amendments that I've gotten through on the floor of the House and in the subcommittees and the committees and the bills and the efforts that we have shown, that we have the leadership capability that we need to make a very successful term in the U.S. Senate. But again, I need your help and your support to do that. And I will abide by your endorsement process. So as I say, it's going to take 1 million hands and 1 million prayers to win this race in 1994, but we can do it together. So tonight I'm here to ask for your help and your support. And I would be very proud to serve as the U.S. Senator with your help. Thank you very much.
Very pleased to be back here in Moorhead once again. I suppose this must be about the 5th or 6th time I've been here campaigning. Last spring I made about 8 of the county conventions. This spring I spent more time down the 1st and 2nd, but I'm very familiar with the 7th district. You know, my campaign has been all uphill from the start. It started on March 1st, a year ago, in Cloquet. I got up and gave my first speech, and the county chairman, Barry Berquist, got up and he said, you know, if a lawyer and a politician and an IRS agent jump off a cliff at the same time, who lands first? And the answer is, who cares? But I thought that was an interesting start, since I had 2 of those bases covered. And then I left that convention. I went out to McDonald's to have a bite to eat after the convention to ride back to the Twin Cities, where I live with my wife and 4 children. And I got to McDonald's, and there was ice and water and ruts in the parking lot, and I slipped, and I ended up flat on my back in a puddle of water, icy water, in McDonald's in Cloquet. So that was the start of the campaign. But I will tell you, I did save the food. That's important to me. Well, tonight, I have a speech for tomorrow, which I intend to give you. But I know in these 5-minute speeches you can't say much, so I thought I'd take just a couple minutes tonight maybe to go into an issue in a little bit more detail. And I thought one issue I'd like to talk about is health care. And of course, that might be a little presumptuous with Senator Dyrstad here, but it's an issue that matters a lot to me too, and I thought I'd say just a few minutes on it. The Clinton plan, the more I look at it, the scarier it gets. And I'm sure you feel the same way too. He's going to have this idea that they're going to have the National Health Board, we're going to have these regional health alliances, they're going to have global budgets. And of course, when the money runs out at the end of the year, then the care is done. They can either not pay the providers, they can either not give you care, which is probably what they'll do, or they can make the states pay. None of the 3 is very good. You know, you say, why do we need this matter? You know, why do we need to reinvent the wheel? 80% of people are happy with their health care in this country. He's trying to promote that there's a crisis. You know, that's how he's going to get it through, a crisis atmosphere. Well, we do spend more on health care in this country. We also spend more on parks, and we spend more on housing. We spend more on a lot of things. Americans believe in saving lives. That's what we are based on. Over in England, if you're 55 and you need kidney dialysis, what do? They say, you're old enough, go away. That's what they do, and that's what they're going to do under the Clinton plan too, so we don't need that. What we need is market-based reform. That is the conservative approach. That is the approach I favor. I think we can count on Senator Dyrstad and other Republican senators to push for this during this year. I'm in favor of medical savings accounts. We have to make insurance portable so that when you leave a job, you can take your insurance with you. That has to be a requirement. We have to limit the amount of pre-existing conditions that health insurance companies can knock off. We got to make paperwork more standard. We've got to make health insurance deductible for people so they can buy their own insurance, and if you don't have any income, you can get a voucher so you can all have insurance. That's the way to go about it, I think, in this country. People want insurance, and we've got to get doctors and nurses into rural areas that are underserved. These are the problems. Let's deal with those. We don't need to start over. We don't need this budget-busting plan that Clinton said. I didn't even talk about cost. I'm not even going to talk about it. That's even something else again. That's what we don't need. So, I'm going to talk more about electability later in my closing. I'm submitting to you that I'm the most electable candidate here. One of the things about electability is who can take an issue, who can analyze it, who can go into it in depth. So, look forward to the questions and talk some more later. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Now for the first question. Where's John? Well, it's all over. They must be sorting through the questions, trying to determine.
We had 80 of them.
All right.
Synthesize the 80 to 8.
These get hermetically sealed in a pumpkin rifle.
Made a decision, Roger. Decided that since Mark and I had reviewed the questions and have had rehearsal, we wouldn't ask you to read Mark's handwriting. So I have the privilege of asking the questions, if you'll keep track of the order in which they are to be answered. We have 8 questions. We have a mix of foreign affairs, domestic policy, and general philosophical questions regarding the role of government in a contemporary society. Question number 1 goes to Jen Olson, and then each of the candidates will have the time to respond. What role should the federal government play in the lives of U.S. citizens? Provide an example where you would draw the line on government intervention when allowing personal choice.
I believe that yet strongly in individual responsibility. We as a people have a strong desire to improve ourselves, to get ahead, to benefit from the fruits of our labors. We do not appreciate the oppression of government. I got into politics over an issue like that. I had designed our home, and my dad and I had built it. And the neighboring community, government, decided that the cheapest way to put in their sewer system was to annex the part of the township that I lived in and dump raw sewage into the lake in front of our house. So I've had experience from way back about the role that government can play. And it brings about activism. Wherever possible, I believe that we should be making individual choices. But when we make choices, we ought to be prepared to deal with the consequences and accept the consequences of those choices. We can't expect government always to be taking away the consequences. And we are living in a society that more and more has moved to accepting societal blame rather than individual responsibility. And I think we need to bring that back to the individual.
Thank you. Bert McKasy.
I'm a small businessman. I've been in my own small businesses for the last 18 years, and I believe first and foremost in individual responsibility and individual initiative. And if I had to pick the one thing that I would most change to improve society, it would be that everyone started assuming responsibility for his or her own actions in our personal lives, in our business lives,
and certainly in the way we relate to government. Right now, everybody is looking to government for the answer. And I think that traditional republicanism stands for less government rather than more. And I can tell you that not once in my 18 years in business has the government ever been anything other than a hindrance to me. Whether it's OSHA, whether it's building inspectors, whether it's a state revenue department, I say let government get out and let the private sector do what it does so very, very well.
I've always been a strong supporter of a smaller federal government is a better federal government. In other words, I believe more in state rights and local rights, that the issues and problems can be better handled at the local level or closest to home, so to speak. I think the last 30 years of the great social architectural programs that the Democrats have tried to impose on this country, beginning with Lyndon Johnson in the early 60s and $5 trillion later, have shown that government cannot move a country, cannot provide everything for individuals. Mainly, if you want to look at it in one respect, the government is not a parent. It can never raise a child. It takes parents to do that. We have to strengthen the families. So the social programs of the last 30 years and the ever-growing federal government and its influence has not worked. I was a strong supporter of Ronald Reagan and his emphasis on states' rights. And they always used a statement that he used and quoted Confucius, that if you give a man a fish today, you have to feed him tomorrow. But if you give him a pole, he'll feed himself for a lifetime. So I also agree that we need to have more states' rights, personal empowerment, personal responsibility. I think one of the big issues, such as the overextending of the federal government into H.R. 6, which we voted on the floor of the House, which was the reauthorization of secondary and elementary education in the budget. Just one simple word left out of the big debate in conference and committee before it came to the floor was the word public. And the phrasing was that all teachers, all full-time teachers must be certified by the federal government. Left out the small word public. We fought for 2 days with a number of amendments to get that word imposed, so it did not overextend the government's reach into private parochial and home schools. Just an example of the continuing effort that the federal government is to take more and more control of your lives. What we need to do is to reduce the scope of the federal government, put more responsibility on states, and especially more responsibilities on the individual.
I want to answer this question in the context of education. I've been a teacher in the Hamlin Law School for 20 years, been at the Supreme Court for a couple of years, so I've kind of seen various aspects of the law and education. And my philosophy is that we want to keep the parents in and the federal government out. And that shows up in various things. It showed up in H.R. 6. The people tried to slip in some things to prevent homeschooling, require certification. Clearly, this went down. People rose up. They said they won't have it. It's out. And it also shows up in outcome-based education. Now, it wasn't too long ago. It was only less than a year ago that the State Department of Education was pushing outcome-based education as a great thing. Now, today, they're in full retreat. And one of the largest districts in the state, Rosemount, Apple Valley, Egan, has dumped OBE just within the past couple weeks. That's a tribute to all of us. That was the pressure from all of us that did that. That is democracy in action. And that's the way it should be. It's the common people banding together for what they want. The effort should come from the bottom up, from the people to the government, and not in reverse. That's my philosophy of government.
One area in which I think we have had too much government intervention is in the area of mandates as it applies to a variety of areas. We've talked about some of them, but I would like to get one more, and that's in the area of pollution and pollution control. And I can share with you an example of where I felt even our state agency implied to me as the mayor of Red Wing that we had not lived by their rules and they were going to penalize us. No flexibility in being able to deal with those rules. And what happened was we had some emissions that came out of our city-owned incinerator, and because some of the emissions came out on June 30th and some on July 1st, We were fined for emitting in 2 different months, and the fine was double of what it would have been had we done it on June 29th and June 30th instead of the other way around. So I feel that in the interpretation of mandates, which many times are things that we all like to see in place, we need to have some flexibility in government. We need to do that in many of the regulations that come from the federal level. Let the local people decide how they best can implement those regulations to meet what we feel are fair guidelines. And I think if we can do that, because each area of the country is different, each area of the state is different, and we can meet the regulations we need to in order to have things in place that we all agree on without having a lack of flexibility in order to deal with them. And so I think if we could implement the flexibility, we all would appreciate it very much.
Thank you. The next question will be answered by Bert McKasy first.
Question number 2. With regard to crime, what role should the federal government play in crime prevention?
About 2 years ago, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms did a study. Bear in mind that's the same group that handled the Waco debacle. And what they concluded was that 66% of the violent crimes are committed by about 7% of the criminals. And the very simple answer to me is you get that 7% and you throw them in jail and you throw away the keys. Right now, we have first-time nonviolent offenders in Stillwater, Sandstone, and prisons across the country. And I think we're going to run out of prison space. I think there's only going to be a finite number of cells. And I think that we are going to have to do it smarter. I think we're going to have to sentence to service. I think we're going to have to sentence those people to boot camps where the recidivism rate is less and the cost is less. But having said that, I think it's also incumbent upon policymakers like me to do whatever we can to address the root causes of crime. And the root causes, as far as I'm concerned, are the breakdown of our family values and support system. It's joblessness. It's really a loss of hope and opportunity on the part of our young people. And going back to the last question about the role of government, and what's the role of the federal government in crime and in penal systems, I say go back to the lowest level. I think that Minnesota is in a better position to decide what should be done relative to crime and its prevention and its incarceration than the federal government in Washington.
In a series of town meetings I held one time, one gentleman got up and he said, to reduce crime, you need only 2 things. He said, that is the fear of God and the fear of punishment is the only way you're going to reduce crime. And we've tried the avenues by the liberals of more and more prevention programs, rehabilitation, other efforts. It has not worked. What we need to have is sure and swift punishment. I like to refer to the young man in Singapore who is facing caning, which none of us would like to face. But there they're going to carry out a punishment that they had set for the crime. And there is a young man who will never vandalize cars in Singapore again if that is carried out. So in this country, we need a government that will provide the same kind of sure and swift punishment that's going to make our streets safe for our friends and our neighbors, that we can walk our streets, and that we can send our kids to school with confidence. We can't do it with the programs that have been out there today. The crime bill that was just debated and passed in the House this past week, while it talks tough on crime, shoots so many loopholes that it does not have an impact. In fact, a lot of congressmen have said no bill this time would have been better than the bill that we passed. So what we need again is to go back and make sure that if you do the crime, you do the time. The federal government's role is that we have to provide the guidelines. If it takes more money for more prisons, we're willing to do that. As Bert mentioned, we've got to take the most serious offenders, those who commit 70% of the crimes, put them in jail without parole. The 3-time loser, or the law should be in effect, not 3 times and you're out, but 3 times and you're in. And to make sure that we enforce those laws. Also, I think if it's going to be more dollars for prisons, to to make our streets safer, we should do that. Just a quick story, a young man in Florida, 59 times he'd been arrested by the time he was 15, 21 times for assaults with some kind of a weapon, including guns. He was not arrested and put in jail until he had killed 2 tourists. So again, I think we have to go back and get serious about crime if we want to reduce it. Thank you.
I'm the only one here that's been a prosecutor, so I know what necessary to be done with crime. In fact, 2 days ago, Ed Meese, the former Attorney General of the United States, was in town in the Twin Cities for me, campaigning for me. He's a friend of mine. And he talked about crime. He talked about crime at the University of Minnesota. He talked about crime at Hamlin University. And I think we all know what needs to be done. We need to, in the short term, put these people in prison. We do need a crime bill. I would have voted for the House crime bill, although Ron didn't. But short term, we simply must have these people put away. And then we have to have boot camps. That's the way to get these people some discipline. Again, people here voted against boot camps, but I think that's the best chance yet to get some discipline. And long term, certainly it's correct. We must put the American family back together. We must have welfare reform. We must have incentives for families to stay together. That's the only way these young folks are going to get socialized. That is the long-term solution. It fits right in with our Republican philosophy of learning discipline at home. It's high time that the people behind bars should be criminals and not honest people in their own homes and businesses.
Thank you. I want to share with you again the fact that as we look at individual responsibilities in our own communities, that when I was growing up, everybody in the neighborhood kept an eye on me and knew what I was doing, as did my parents and everyone else's children in that neighborhood, as I'm sure happened to most of you. And again, it was the caring that was reflected in the community and the individual responsibility that we had to behave because we knew something might happen if we didn't. And we've lost that now. We have lost that in our society, that individual caring and the individual responsibility. And we need to get back to that. And I think that's a very important part of it. We cannot give the federal government the responsibility to handle the current crime issues in this country. They have to be done locally and within each community. We all have to watch out for each other and protect each other. As we were talking about the federal crime bill at this point in time, we have looked over what it would cost us in Minnesota, the passage of that bill. It would cost us approximately $500 million a year if we went along with many of those regulations that are stipulated there and changes that are stipulated in that federal bill. Yet we in Minnesota have some of the least expensive incarceration rates and per person incarceration rates that we have in the country. And we have lower crime rates than in many other areas of the country. And to force those greater expenses on us to tackle the problem in that way, I don't think is appropriate. We need to look at implementing it at the local level and making sure that we carry out our efforts in that area.
I think that crime must be fought on more than one front. And the federal government should set an example, particularly that deals with federal crime. But it shouldn't add more burden back to the states and local governments where the fight really has to take place. Sentences should mean something. There should be consequences to action. And those violent criminals, if we're going to prevent their continuing to carry out their ways and their crimes and jeopardize our safety, do need to have sentences that mean what they say rather than in and out. I like the catch and release fishing example you use, Rod. The other one that I think is even more critical if we're really going to prevent something is we've got to stop adding the burdens to families and have policies that contribute to the breakup rather than the strengthening of families. Families without fathers are feeding our criminal justice. If a young boy does not have the influence of a father between the ages of 3 and 5 in the shaping of that conscience, it never happens. Now, that's not an indictment on all single moms, but it is an indictment on our society that is feeding the continuation of that incomplete family. When you have young people that are killing without conscience, they have no value on their own life or anyone else's. It is a sad commentary on our society. We also have to have education that means something. Real education, not social engineering and talking about conflict resolution. We need to learn to read, write, communicate, perform math so that we can build further learning upon it. And the federal government can do better if they stay out of it and let us do it backwards. It can and should be done.
The next question will be answered by Congressman Long Grams.
Question number 3. Will you work for tax credits to enable educational choice, including private and home schooling?
I think across the board we need tax credits for everybody, but for education, I'm a strong supporter of the voucher system. I feel that the only way we can put excellence back into education, to bring our students from the low SAT scores, we put more money into the effort for education and have gotten out lower scores in students that have not fared as well on an international scale as we have in the past. How do we go about improving our education system? Is it putting more dollars? I don't believe so. There's a story about a principal up in northern Minnesota who was getting an award because his students had some of the highest or the highest GPA scores in the state, grade point averages. And while they were talking with him, they also discovered at the same time that his students also had some of the lowest dollars spent per student. And he asked the question, he was asked the question, well, what do you account for this? And he said, I don't know. All we can offer our students is the basics. And I think maybe that's what we've missed. We've got to get back to the basics. So I believe my young daughter, her 2 oldest children, I'm the father of 4, the grandfather of 3, and my daughter's 3 oldest, or her 2 oldest children, they were being sent to parochial school. They're making that sacrifice in their budget to ensure an education that they feel their children should have, whether it's the safety in the schools or the curriculum. But I think parents know best of what they want for their children, and they should have the opportunity and the freedom to send that child where they want to go. We've got a president of the United States that has the freedom to go to the school that his parents thought were right, and he also has a young daughter that he is sending to a private school that he thinks is going to provide her the best education. People argue against vouchers and saying it's only a tool for the rich. But the rich can send their children where they want. They have that opportunity. But a voucher would let the poorest of the poor send their children to the school that they thought would provide them the best education and the best opportunity. So to go back to the question, would I support a voucher? Yes, I would support it very strongly. I think we have to put competition back into our education system, not at the point of gutting our public schools, but at the point of ensuring real, solid education for our children.
Not too long ago, all of us appeared before a board of the AFL-CIO seeking endorsement from the Minnesota AFL-CIO for Minnesota Senate candidates. Well, I didn't get it. None of the rest of us here got it either. I guess that didn't surprise us a whole lot. One of the Democrats got it. Well, I'm not anti-union in any way, and I told them that. But, you know, one of them wanted me to come out against vouchers. And that's what she said was the real sticking point with her. And I said, well, you know, I can't do that. I've campaigned the whole time that I'm in favor of vouchers, and you're going to get an honest, straight answer from me. We may not agree, but you're going to know where I stand, and I think that's very important, is the trust between the public and a candidate. And I have come out in favor of vouchers all along for both public schools and private schools. It's clearly a way of making all schools better. It will help the inner city youth especially. Think of these poor children. They have no choices. They're stuck in the inner city. Their only choice is a local public school. And we see it in the Twin Cities even more than you do here in the 7th District. The types of conduct. The Burnsville school just burned 2 days ago. I mean, that's the suburbs. I'm talking about the inner cities, the types of activities that go on in there. If we give these children of choice, they're going to do much better, and the public schools are going to get better. And I think that's the way to go throughout the state.
The education of our children, of course, is central to the future of this country and the opportunities that our young people will have to compete in a worldwide economy. And we know that our young people have fallen behind recently, and the fear that I have of any federal control of education is that we will fall behind even further. In Minnesota, as we compare our students to those around the rest of the country, we fare quite well, particularly in some of the math areas now where we've had an emphasis and we're improving. And if we go to any type of federal control, we will, I believe, move down to that lowest common denominator. And we have to be very careful of not entering into situations that might be a cause or something would happen to us because of doing that. In Minnesota, we have public school choice, the opportunity for young people to move amongst our public schools and to have the advantage of moving into magnet schools and other schools that we have. And I think that certainly is a direction that we need to continue to move to give our young people those opportunities to move between schools within our public school system.
Well, my field is education. I'm a product of both public and private education, but my career has been in public education. But while I've been in the legislature, I've been the champion of the rights of parents. I carried the legislation that led to the definition of the school law that allows parents to educate their children at home and protects the rights of private schools. I was the only Senate Republican author on the open enrollment bill that also included post-secondary enrollment options. I have worked hard for charter schools, and have also was successful as a minority member of getting past the legislation that requires that school districts have a policy whereby parents can know what is being taught and choose an alternative if they have an objection and not have their students penalized academically. I don't believe that the federal government should get into the education business other than shaping some of the policy for some of those educational minority needs, as in special education and other kinds of specialties. I don't believe the federal government should be in the voucher business. And I'm not sure the voucher is the right answer. I have worked with the Center of American Experiment and some of the research to see if we can design a type of universal school choice system that will work at the state level. But the question was, do you believe in tax credits for educational choice? I think, yes, I do. I'll answer that one straight up. And I believe that that is an appropriate role that the federal government could in fact do. And that is put some of those tax dollars back in the hands of parents and families so they can exercise that choice. And I believe that method would also ensure that we wouldn't have the undue regulations and controls the government is so wanting to put upon us, both as families but also as individuals.
The one thing that we're going to have to be watchful of is this Goals 2000, which as far as I'm concerned is going to suck $1 billion out of the local areas and take it to Washington. And then if we will agree to OBE or whatever hoops the federal government wants us to jump through, some of that money will come back to us. Well, I say that's baloney. And interestingly enough, when I was discussing this with a delegate last night, he said to me, you know, everybody's blaming Clinton and the Clinton administration for this. As far as I'm concerned, Goals 2000 originated in the Reagan and Bush administrations. And I think maybe that's something for us to think about and something that I'm going to research a little more. As to the question of vouchers, I'm a small businessman. I'm a job creator. I believe that private, free market competition makes the world go round. And if it's good enough for business, it's good enough for education. And I'm a firm believer in the voucher system because I think that strong private school systems will cause increased competition with the public school systems, and hopefully the level will rise right across the board. Now, some people say, we shouldn't try vouchers because we'll lose control. Well, maybe we will, maybe we won't. But in business and in government, I'm an experimental type person. And I say, let's try it. Let's negotiate it. Let's see if we can't make it work. We have to step back, then we will step back. The other thing that I want to mention is that as far as I'm concerned, the original voucher system was the GI Bill. And I never heard one GI or one public or private institution that participated in that program ever complain about it or ever say it didn't work, because it did work, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you again. The next question will be answered first by Professor Jen McFarland.
Please provide an assessment of our defense posture. What should we do vis-a-vis defense spending and military personnel levels?
Well, if this weren't such a serious subject, I'd be tempted to say what defense posture is the current administration. Under Jimmy Carter, the percentage of gross domestic product in the defense budget slipped down to about 4.7%. And the Clinton budget is going to be down to 4.1, and they're projecting by about 1997, 1998, it's going to be down to 3.0%. It's going to be spent on defense. President Clinton is projecting American power abroad. He's talking about Bosnia, he's talking about North Korea, he's talking about other places. At the same time, he's cutting the budgets. And it just doesn't work. We absolutely must maintain a strong national defense. That is the first and foremost job of the federal government. Defense is a real key. I was in the Army myself, so I have an appreciation of this. And I guess the only thing I can say is that President Clinton seems to be following a kind of a new twist on Teddy Roosevelt's idea. President Clinton thinks he should speak loudly and carry a small stick. Well, it doesn't work that way. I think that what we saw under President Reagan and President Bush was that when you have a conflict, when you have some place where there's a problem, you have to have a clear idea of what you're going to do, how you're going to go in there, exactly how you're going to achieve the goal, and exactly how you're going to get out. We did not see that in Somalia. I don't see that in Bosnia right now. We're kind of just floundering around there now. Maybe we'll have an airstrike, maybe we won't. We simply must have a clear plan, and we must maintain defense spending at a level sufficient to meet our commitments. And unfortunately, I just don't see President Clinton having that posture.
I feel it's very important that we as the United States continue to have a strong defense. And as we have been alluding to, at this present time, we seem to have no foreign policy in place along those lines. As we look at North Korea and the recent threats there for the development of nuclear warheads, we already have approximately 40,000 troops in South Korea. The missiles that they have now in North Korea can go over about a 1,000-mile range, and they're anticipating that they will shortly have a missile that will have a 1,500-mile range. I believe we need to have a plan in place to counter what might happen there, or a plan in order to prevent a disaster happening there. And I don't see that in place at the federal level at this point in time. I'm strongly in favor of maintaining a strong defense, because if we do not, we know what's happened in Bosnia and other areas when we said, well, now I think we're going to do this. That hasn't happened. What has happened when we do not show strength is that those people keep moving forward and having destruction and really carving out the local people. And we cannot allow that to continue to happen around the world, because the United States will no longer be respected if we do not have a strong policy in place and have something with which to back it up. Another portion of the question pertained to a number of individuals in the military. And as we look at those numbers, of course, the area that's being cut is the defense spending has been cut. It's not been in the development of other armaments. It's been in the number of people. And as we look at the ability for those people who are in the service to then come out and have jobs. It's a wonderful job training area for our young people in this country. And if we eliminate that source of jobs, we also will be cutting out a very important area of opportunity for our young people.
The defense of our nation is a constitutional responsibility. It's one of the few that the federal government has. And it ought to keep a very strong focus on that. Because the nature of man hasn't changed. And I say that generically. The Cold War may be over, but we are not a world at peace. There are 43 wars being waged at this time around the world. And it qualifies as a war when 500 civilians have been killed. We don't have a clear foreign policy as to where and what we should be doing, given the volatility of our world order at this time. But one thing we do know is that one of the greatest means of preserving peace is being strong, not weak. We must continue to maintain a strong defense. It strengthens our own people. It stimulates the research and development in technologies that have had spin-offs into other aspects of our economy and are a very positive force. We must not succumb to that liberal mentality that wants to undermine and bring us to a point of weakness so they can blow all of the money on their social programs that don't work. So I believe strongly that we need to maintain that strength, both from the standpoint of technology, but adequate forces that can be well trained and disciplined, another commodity that we need a lot of.
I think that the day of the traditional standing army, such as we had in the Second World War, is gone. I think what our government has to do is maintain the type of flexible fighting force that we took to the Mideast when Iraq invaded Kuwait, plus probably the capacity to do one more of those at the same time. Because I think we're going to get involved more in the firefight type battles in the world rather than the large standing army type battles. Korea, for example, one of the things that has aggravated me about our foreign policy and about the way the world relates to us is that they always look to the United States first to take the lead, and it's always our young men and our young women that are in the front lines. And I think that arguably in Somalia, for example, there were plenty of countries in that part of the world that arguably had a greater stake in stability and humanity in this world than did the United States. I think the same thing goes with Korea. I think that if we're going to be involved in those kinds of situations, we should be sure that we've got coalition partners who have something at stake as well. And it seems to me that, for example, Japan and China have as much of a stake in stability and humanity in that part of the world as does the United States of America. And I have to keep coming back to what Colin Powell's three-part test whenever we're going to get involved. You know, should we use American force? Is there a vital interest? And if so, will the public support it? And if so, do we know what we're going to do and how we're going to do it? And most importantly, when are we going to get out?
Well, as we recall back in 1980, the shape of our armed forces after just 4 years of Jimmy Carter. It took 12 years of the Reagan-Bush administration to put back together the strongest military force in the world. The United States, again, was the leader, the only superpower left in the world that could provide the type of security that we needed. It has taken just 15 months of another Democratic administration to bring that military strength down. Could we do another Persian Gulf War? Most people inside and outside of the Pentagon say no, we couldn't. If you look what happened in Iraq when 2 F-15 shot down 2 American helicopters, as Newt Gingrich said, it's just a symptom of the problems our military is now facing. I had lunch with former Secretary of State Alexander Haig last week. And he said something about we need a strong foreign policy to have a strong domestic policy. And we need a strong domestic policy to have a strong foreign policy. He said this administration has neither. In fact, by 1998, in just 4 years, we will be spending twice as much on welfare as we are on the defense of this country. And our Senator Paul Wellstone would like to see even deeper cuts. He says there's more money to be had from the military that we can pour into social programs. We always talk about peace dividends. There are peace savings that we can have and can use and take advantage of. But a peace dividend also, to me, means that we don't have to send our young men and women into war. That we need to keep this country strong. And as you've heard from the other panelists here, this country does not really have a foreign policy. Our friends and allies in the world are questioning where we stand on many issues. We would not have the Somalias, the Bosnias, the Macedonians, the problems in Russia, and also now the brazen actions of Korea, if they thought there was a United States that would back up the words that it says. Our allies are looking to us and they do not see the leadership. We do not have a policy of where do we go today, where do we go tomorrow, who do we want as our allies, and what are we going to do? We need an administration. The 12 years of foreign policy successes banked by the Reagan-Bush administration are being squandered and wasted by the Clinton administration.
At this time, I'd like to take about 2 minutes just to have you get up and stretch your legs. I know you've been sitting for about an hour.
Question number 4. We did that already. Question number 5. Question number 5 is, what is your position on health care reform?
We have 3 minutes to answer that, or two minutes to answer that question. My position on healthcare reform is that the reason that we need to look at healthcare reform is because of the rapidly escalating costs of healthcare that have affected all of us. There are a number of things that we can do to reduce those costs. If we look at administrative changes, a uniform application form for benefits, for example, would save a great number of dollars. As we look at other insurance reform, where we could take our policy from one employer to the next, where we can take small businesses and small individuals, put them into pools where they can purchase their health care together, thereby reducing the costs. But those are some of the things that we could do in order to reduce the costs, which are of great importance to all of us. But we also need to be able to provide coverage for those people who do not have it. And how we're going to provide that coverage. In Minnesota, we have been doing that through Minnesota Care, starting out with the young children, providing them with the insurance opportunities. I feel it's very important that we don't disrupt our existing healthcare system that we have in order to cover the 6% of people in Minnesota who do not have healthcare coverage. We have 94 who are already covered. Also in Minnesota, healthcare is one of our larger industries. 27% of the people who receive care in Minnesota for healthcare come from outside of Minnesota. So it is a business generator for us, a job generator for us in this state. And we have to be very sure that any federal policies that are implemented do not cause us to lose jobs in Minnesota. And I certainly do not favor the single-payer system where the federal government would take over administering health care in this country.
I believe we should strive for the goal of universal access to health care coverage. But I don't believe that we should go to the government. I don't believe that we should disrupt a high quality and jeopardize a high quality healthcare system. I think we may have already done that in Minnesota. Our actions should not be demoralizing the very people we rely on for the care. And I'm hearing too much about people that say, hey, it's not worth it. I'm going to get out. I'm going somewhere else. Or provide a deterrent to young people to pursue careers in the healthcare field. We value good health, and we want good quality. And I certainly do hope that the federal government doesn't follow that same course. And that it doesn't go so far, so fast, that we can't get out there and start to help shape it in a more appropriate way. I believe that you get less of what you tax and more of what you subsidize. And the more that we remove and give the sense that this health care is free and we have unlimited access to it, we don't always make the best health care decisions. We need to empower individuals once again with more choice, understanding, and more of a role in making those health care decisions. And I think the costs will start to come down. The government needs to set an example in health care it already provides, because that's where the most rapidly growing costs are. We need to provide for those people who are now, the discrimination that goes on now in our tax code, when people that are employed get their insurance and tax-free income, and those who have to buy their own have to buy it with after-tax dollars, is unconscionable. We also need tort reform that will also help. I've run out of time, I apologize.
Senator Dyrstad has represented us for 16 years in the Senate, and ironically, I think that his finest hour is probably right ahead, because he is going to be right in the middle of the fray on health care reform as we come into the ninth inning. I think that President Clinton's proposal is too much, too quick. I think it's a massive overdose for the economy, very frankly. And I think that if you talk to anyone who exists under the Canadian system, where it's 6 months for a hysterectomy and 3.5 months for tonsillectomy, I think that is going to make for the most fascinating senatorial debate between the Republican candidate for the Senate and the Democratic candidate for the Senate. And they're all in favor of the Canadian single-payer system. Wellstone, Berglund, Winian, you name it. And I would look forward to debating them, because no matter how much they try and disguise it, it's too much government in health care. I don't think we have a crisis in health care. I think we have some problems in health care, and I think there's some things that we can do better. However, I think President Clinton is trying to employ a shotgun when we really need a rifle shot. And I think that we have to address some issues like portability of benefits and coverage of pre-existing conditions, and certainly continuing reform of the tort system so that the doctors are not continually pushed in the direction of practicing all this very expensive and very defensive medicine. And whenever I mention this in the presence of anyone from the health field, they will chapter and verse give me stories about how they have seen it done because the doctors want to cover their backside.
I think the question most people have is, where is the government coming with this mandate that we need to throw out the best healthcare system in the world and replace it with an untried, untested form of government intervention? I've held a series of town meetings, and overwhelmingly, people come up and say or chant in the meeting, keep government out of my health care. We don't want the government between me and my doctor in making those decisions. I think the basic argument that we have and will have over the next 4 to 6 weeks when this bill is going to be shaped, because we believe that bill will be to the House in June, to the Senate in July, to the President's desk by August. It's a politically driven mandate, not policy driven. I was talking with some doctors at the Mayo Clinic, and one of the doctors said, we know you're going to pass something, we just hope it doesn't hurt us too much. And I said, that's a bad premise to even begin a debate. In the Hippocratic Oath, it says, part of it says, first do no harm. I say there should be a bureaucratic oath that also says, first do no harm before you pass this kind of a health care system. I think the basic debate again is over government versus the private sector. I think, as others have mentioned, the president is trying to move too fast, trying to convince people there is a crisis in health care. The system needs reform. We need antitrust laws, insurance reforms. We need medical malpractice, tort reform. There has to be regulations, state and federal mandates need to be relaxed. We need to change the system to give you more accountability for the dollars you spend, code payments, deductibles. There's a whole host of things that can be done to improve the private sector. I always say, like in the economy, if we say we have 5% unemployment, we would say we've got a strong, healthy economy. But if you're out of a job, you're in a crisis. The same with health care. About 5% do not have direct access to health care. If they're having problems, they do face a crisis. Let's provide that part of the economy. Let's focus our reforms on that area and not throw out the best health care system in the world in exchange for that.
2 days ago, when Ed Reese was here, he said with regard to health care that the 3 biggest lies in the world are, number 1, the check is in the mail. Number 2, this will hurt me more than it will hurt you. And number 3, I'm from Washington and I'm here to help you. Now that's, of course, exactly what's going to happen in health care. In my opening statement, I already spent a couple minutes telling what was wrong with the Clinton plan. And I thought this spring, I really thought there was a chance of passage, and I don't really think so anymore. I think maybe we'll get something this fall, and I think chances are looking a little better. I think we may not get anything. And I think that would be good. I think that these things have to be thought through, and if it looks like we're going to get something, that's the time to redouble our efforts. It's not time to sit back and say, well, let's take whatever Clinton will give us. So the one thing I want to talk about, I already talked about medical savings accounts, and I talked about portability of insurance and various things like that. The one thing I didn't talk about before was medical malpractice tort reform. And you know, it's not very easy running for office being a lawyer, but that's what I am. But there is one advantage, and that is that I have taught torts. As a law professor, I have taught torts a number of times, so I well understand what torts are all about. I know what medical malpractice is all about, and it's absolutely right that doctors and nurses and other medical professionals are practicing defensive medicine. We must get this tort system off of their backs. That's one of the big cost-driving mechanisms that's going on. There are all kinds of ways we can do it. Collateral benefits rule, caps on damages. I'm not going to go into the intricacies of them with you, but the bottom line is to control tort expenses, and that's how to take care of the medical system.
Thank you. The next question will be answered first by State Senator Jen Olson.
The Senate has responsibility for oversight of presidential appointees. Question number 6 asks, how would you approach confirmation of presidential appointees?
Well, in the state Senate, we also have the oversight of confirmation of appointees of the governor. And interestingly enough, a good share of today was spent in just that action of acting in the full Senate on the recommendations of the committees as to whether we should confirm the governor's appointees. Interestingly enough today, we had one appointee that the committee recommended not be approved. And we had a roll call vote, and that recommendation was unanimously upheld. I do believe that we have a responsibility. In general, there is a respect for the role of the president in selecting his appointees. But there is a reason that the Senate has that oversight, because they have a broader responsibility as well to examine the qualifications and to determine whether they should be entrusted with this role and that confirmation should be upheld. I will tell you that there are a number of the Clinton appointees that I would not have supported. And number 1 on that list would have been Jocelyn Elders. I had a preview of her because I sat in on a state Senate committee before she was appointed. She was brought in from Arkansas to testify before the committee to advocate and sing the praises of school-based health clinics. So I had a little preview. I'll stop.
Well, I think there
there are several things that we have to look at in confirmation hearings, and I'm probably unique because I was on the receiving end of a confirmation hearing in the state senate when I was nominated to be Commissioner of Commerce. And Jen probably doesn't remember it, but I do. It degenerated into a lot of partisan bickering, very frankly, and points trying to be scored early between the Democratic control in the Senate and me as a representative of a Republican administration. But I held my own, and the confirmation finally went through. But I think there are several things that have to be looked at. Number one is knowledge. How much knowledge does the person have of the particular field in which they're going to get involved? But the thing that would be most significant to me in acting in an advice and consent role in the Senate would be how much government involvement does that person want to have in the lives of Minnesotans or in the lives of citizens of the United States. And I saw that up firsthand when I was the Commerce Commissioner. And I always felt that less regulation was better than more regulation. And I would dwell very heavily on how much are you going to back off and let the free sector, let the free market operate. So that would be my philosophy.
When it comes to presidential appointments, I think a common agreement is that the president has a right to select members that are going to serve in his cabinet and his administration. But as a member of the Senate that has the right for confirmation and to attend those hearings and to do the questioning, I also feel that we have a right to raise the objections. Not only a right, but a duty, whether you agree or not, whether it's his qualifications or their moral character or where they want to lead this country, should be brought into high question, because these are people, while they might not make the front page headlines in a lot of the decisions they make or the votes they take, it's the number of decisions that they will make on a daily basis that will affect all of us through their agencies or through their jobs. So as Jen said, Jocelyn Elders would have been one that I would not have approved of. Robert Wright would have been another one that would not have gotten my vote. So I think it is a very important role for not only to deny the confirmation, which might not happen because of the majority of the Democrats now in selecting this administration and the cabinet officials, but it's a duty for the Republicans to stand up and draw a line in the sand where they differ, or where this administration is going, the type of people they want to put into place of authority and responsibility, and what we think is right and wrong, and to voice those objections loudly and clearly so the American people at least have an idea of what is a Republican and what is a Democrat. Thank you.
My ideas on this subject have changed some over the last few years. When I was out of the Supreme Court and Bob Bert was nominated, and some of these senators were obviously voting against him because of his political philosophy and judicial philosophy, I thought that was totally illegitimate. And then I was challenged on that, so I did some research, and I found that in constitutional history there is ground for challenging someone because you think that person is just plain wrong on political philosophy. Although I wish the Democrats would have been a little more honest and said that's what they were doing instead of voting against him and claiming he didn't have the judicial temperament. So, I intend to join the Judiciary Committee, and I intend to stop some of these judges that Clinton is appointing, and I intend to vote against some of the other appointees. Number one, as everybody else has said, would have been Jocelyn Elders. Number two would have been Sheldon Hackney, the head of the National Endowments, whose previous claim to fame was that he allowed one group of students to confiscate an entire press run of a conservative newspaper and did nothing to them. Number three would have been Roberta Achtenberg. There's another one too. Number four would have been Rosemary Burkett, who was just confirmed for the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, and she's never met a criminal defendant she didn't like. Those are the types of people we've got to stop. Way back when, some 15 years ago, I was talking with a congressman, and he said that he thought that the purpose of advice and consent was to stop the dim bulbs. Well, I do agree that there is some of that. You have to give the president some leeway. But I'm ready to give this president very little leeway.
Being on the administrative side and someone who helped select Bert to be our Commerce Commissioner, I understand the importance of having your team together as you carry out what you feel are the goals and the initiatives of your administration. But I also feel it's very important, and as a senator would raise those questions on ability of the people who have been selected to serve in those positions, as well as their philosophy, so that the American people know those positions and what their positions might be in those areas. And sometimes I believe that that questioning then does cause others to ask questions as well, and perhaps decisions be changed as to who is most appropriate to fulfill those positions and take on those administrative responsibilities. And as everyone was going through the list, another individual's name popped into my mind, and that was Donna Shalala. So I think we have had a number of people that we could all have a question about, certainly not only their philosophy, but in their abilities.
Thank you. The next question will be answered first by former Commerce Commissioner Bert McKasy.
We're on question number 7 of 8, the summary to follow. Question number 7. What would be your approach to building the federal budget?
Well, I can tell you what the approach to building the budget in McKasy Travel is, which is a travel company that I started 11 years ago from scratch without customer one. I sit down with my manager every year, and we basically do zero-based budgeting. And we don't assume that we have any history or that there are any needs that are sacrosanct. And we build from square one. And we look at every single expenditure to decide whether it merits retention for the upcoming year. And I don't see any reason why the federal government couldn't apply some of that same technique. And on the topic of budgeting, I would be in favor of a balanced budget amendment, one certainly phased in. I think that's probably the most workable and most politically palatable way to do that. But I don't know many households that run by deciding to go out and spend and then figure out how they're going to cover their costs. That's basically the way our federal government operates. So zero-based budgeting is the way I would approach it.
To get the federal budget under control, what I would do is work harder and continue the efforts to pass Families First, which is a tax-cutting, pro-growth, balancing budget amendment all built into one. Again, that was adopted by Republicans as the alternative to the Clinton package. What we have to do is get our spending under control. It's not that we're taxed too little. It's that this government continues to spend too much. And my bill goes at the heart of the problem, and that is to cut nearly $1 trillion in spending over the next 8 years. That would bring us into a surplus of about $103 billion compared to the administration's own admitted numbers today. That would be about a $500 billion deficit. So we have to make some of these tough choices. I testified before the Sable Budget Committee. And I had Mr. Sable kind of red-faced when I told him that the only way we can make decent decisions is if we were sitting in your chair and we would balance the budget if we could do that. But what we have to do is work hard to continue to bring our budget deficits under control. We cannot continue to pass these debts on to our children and our grandchildren. I like to always mention, when we passed the emergency flood relief bill for the Midwest during the floods in the Mississippi, when we passed the emergency bills for Hurricane Iniki in Hawaii and Andrew in Florida, and the $10 billion we just passed to send to the earthquake victims in California, Congress is patting itself on the back, what a great job we've done to help our fellow man. But we did nothing. And this is what Republicans voted against, because they did this as emergency spending off budget, and they borrowed the money. So none of us in this room had to take $1 out of our pockets to send the aid to these victims. We borrowed it, and we put that bill in the names of our children and grandchildren. So in order to start taking responsibility, we have to start being more responsible. And that is, like Bert said, we support the balanced budget amendment. If you bring in $100, you only spend $100. You don't spend $102 and then look for taxes to make up the difference.
spent a week as an intern in a South Dakota senator's office on Richmond from South Dakota. And he arranged for somebody to give me a briefing on the budget process. And this person came in and said, well, the senators put in these proposals, and then the representatives put in these proposals, and then the agencies put in these proposals, and that's how you put the budget together. And I said, well, gee, isn't this a guarantee that the budget's going to grow? And he got mad. He says, well, that's the way it works. So I kind of thought that was not the right way to do it. Clearly, I think we can all tell the right way to do it is to get a budget and then see what fits in there. That's the way to do it. Congress hasn't seemed to have been able to do it for the longest time yet. The balanced budget amendment is an idea I support. The line item veto I support. The Families First bill, which was written by the Heritage Foundation, now goes under the name of the McKasy budget proposal, I support. And I've made a long list of budget cuts. When I announced last fall for the Senate, I came up with a lot of things. The Super Collider, the Space Station, National Helium Reserve, consolidating administration of AFDC and other welfare projects, elimination of highway demonstration projects, the national endowments, slashing federal civilian employment, etc., etc. And you know, my 9-year-old son, he saw me making this up, and he looked at the figures, 2.7 billion here, 2.2 billion here. And what he said to me was this, he says, we should get rid of these. Are we paying for them? Well, I think he's got more sense than the entire Congress. And that's exactly what we've got to do. We've got to be tough. We've got to get rid of these things. And the way to do it is to require a balanced budget.
I also favor the balanced budget amendment approach. And another approach would be to pass the tax bills before you pass the spending bills, so you know the dollars that you have available before you spend them. I'm sure all of us do that in our personal budgeting. We know what the dollars will be coming in before we make our decisions on where we're going to spend our money. Unfortunately, the federal government has never had to do that, and I think it's time to take a look at that. It's estimated that over the next 10 years, the national budget, the deficit in the federal budget will never go below $180 billion and will go as high as $300 in each of the next 10 years. So you know that our national debt is going to increase if we do not put into place a balanced budget amendment. And we need to look at where the spending is going and how we're going to make those decisions. But if we have guidelines to begin with, then we can start making those difficult choices.
Our state is one of many that operate with a balanced budget. And in the time that I've served in the state Senate, we have moved thanks to having control of the House for a 2-year time. When Representative McKasy was in that capacity, and also as with 4 years of a Republican governor, of moving to the point where you do, in fact, decide the level of taxation first before you determine the level of spending. Because the Democrats' practice had always been decide how much you want to spend and then figure out where you're going to get the money. I've always maintained that politicians will never control spending. You've got to keep the pressure on the tax side of the equation. That's why we need a balanced budget at the federal level. And I believe in the building of that budget, we should start with the dollars that are going to be spent, set the priorities within that, and allocate, and if we don't have enough to do it all, behold, we won't do it all. Some of it belongs back with the state and local governments anyway, and it would add less burden to them if it didn't have such benevolence from the federal level. So I do support the balanced budget amendment and do support our putting stringent controls on our spending.
Thank you again. The last question will be answered first by Congressman Rod Grants.
We've come full cycle. We started with a philosophical question and we end with a fundamental philosophical question. How would you balance the rights of private property owners versus the rights of society with regard to natural resources?
I think when it comes to the environment, whether it's clean air, clean water, we all want the same things. We want to make sure that we leave a legacy to our children, that we haven't destroyed the cycles on this world. But I also believe that we can coexist with the environment. I've been a developer and I know what it is when the local governments and other agencies try to shut you out in the name of wetlands or the environment or clean water, where they trample on the rights of private individuals. I believe that we can coexist, we can co-develop, and we can be good caretakers of what we have been given. It's not that we have to be fenced out and not allowed to enjoy or partake of this. So I'm a very strong supporter of personal rights and property rights, where the government has a role to play. There are rules and regulations we should follow, and there are things that are good for everybody. But again, where you usurp private rights and personal rights in the name of just some regulations passed by a bureaucrat in Washington, I don't support. So again, I stress I strongly support clean air, clean water, and the environment, but I also support strongly personal and property rights as well.
I'm very pleased that the Supreme Court has been paying a lot more attention to property rights recently. They've decided that state and local governments cannot just up and take property. We have to enforce the same thing on the federal government now. I'm speaking specifically about wetlands. And the whole area of agriculture is one that I have talked about for over this past year. So far as I know, I'm the only candidate that really has campaigned on a platform of being a farm state senator and helping our small town, our farmers and small town businesses that depend on them. And one of the main things that comes up is the wetlands, where you can send a spy satellite over and decide there are more wetlands, and then suddenly you have less property. That's not right. We've got to get a much more sensible wetlands policy, one that balances farming with protection of the wetlands, protection of the environment. And I tell you, I think that we don't want to ruin our environment, but I think the scale has tipped too far that way. It's time to tip it back a little bit more towards agricultural interests.
I think it's very important as we look at the environment and as we look at business and as we look at individual rights to balance them out. And instead of having fines in place, try to work cooperatively, because many times when we implement a regulation together with business, both the environment and the business win. And I can give you an example of that. It happened with 3M in St. Paul, where their license, the amount of the emissions that they could put into the air was cut in half, but yet the state gave them the flexibility to be able to change how they implemented procedures on their line, and if they were going to manufacture something else, they could make that change without having to come back for an additional permit, as long as they stayed within the emission guidelines that had been established. So by doing that, 3M won as a company, their employees won, and also the state of Minnesota and all of us won, because we had cleaner air coming out of there. And there are many times I think we can work cooperatively together and accomplish things in that manner. Another example would be what we're trying to do and how it helped the farmers in Minnesota with their feedlot problems. Putting into our bonding bill dollars that will help them in order to meet the requirements to help clean up, for example, the Minnesota River and from the runoff that comes from our farmlands. The farmer will gain and we will gain. And if we can work cooperatively in these areas, we will all gain, rather than being at loggerheads against each other and not accomplishing what we all need to accomplish in those areas.
That question just brings back a memory. When I was mayor of Dyrstad, one of the agencies of government pounced and attempted to take land in a residential neighborhood for a public use. And Governor Quee ordered it stopped. But lo and behold, the friends of the bureaucrats got a sympathetic senator to carry a bill to overturn it. That senator is now your congressman. I was mayor, testified before that committee. And believe it or not, we stopped him. It is put in my heart a strong concern for the appropriateness of government in terms of the taking of property. I lost one battle, got gray hairs to show for it, when on a purely partisan political basis, the power to condemn land was put in the hands of appointed people rather than elected. And I know there's one person who lost it on a tie vote that says he'll go to his grave regretting that decision because of what it did in the lives of those people. Now, we've been addressing environmental policy. We've gone so far in environmental policy, more so even in the state than in the federal level, that we've made every one of us in the state criminals. And I think it's about time that we have some common sense environmental policy that is understood as having value for us as individuals. And if it in fact does require the taking of some land or right, there ought to be compensation for it. Those are the principles that I have fought for and I will continue to fight for.
Teddy Roosevelt was always sort of a hero of mine. I look at him as a president who struck a proper balance between environmental use of the land and productive use of the land. It seemed to me that every time there is a farm bill, there's talk about winter cover crop, there's talk about pesticides, fungicides, something new all the time. My exposure to farming is my dad owned a farm in Lesueur, Minnesota. And he used to take me down to the farm, and when I was about 10 years old, the farmer, Emo Tillajohn, took me on a tour of the farm, and he took me out into the barn, and he said, well, Bert, do you think you want to be a farmer? And I said, well, gee, I don't know, Mr. Tillajohn. And he said, well, I think if you really want to take a serious look at farming, here, you take a chaw of Copenhagen and you put it in your lower lip, as I did, and then he said you hold it for about 10 minutes before you spit. Well, I didn't make it to the 10 minutes, and I never made it as a farmer either. But I can tell you that when I was in Minnesota, before I was the Minnesota Commissioner of Commerce regulating the 435 state chartered banks, when I drive through greater Minnesota and see standing water in the fields, I think farmers are in trouble. After being the state's chief bank regulator, when I see that, I know that the farmers are in trouble, and I also know that the bankers are in trouble, and I would also know that Main Street, Minnesota is probably in trouble too. So I can tell you that those are needs that I'm going to be very sensitive to as a U.S. Senator.
Firing line. Next, we'll have the concluding remarks, and as we indicated at the beginning of the program, this will be reversed. The person who began first will be last, and so forth. Beginning this part, or this section, will be Doug McFarland.
Thank you, Roger.
3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay. Well, I want to hark back to the last time we had a Democratic president in the White House and we had a midterm election. And of course, if you remember, we had a bumbling Southern governor in the White House at the time as well. The year was 1978, and we independent Republicans in Minnesota cleaned up. We elected Dave Dyrstad, who's here tonight. We elected Rudy Boschwitz. We elected Al Tweedy. We elected a whole host of legislators. We had a great year. Now the year is 1994, and we have another opportunity. We have the message again, we have the candidates again, and you know the Democrats are helping again. I'm sure you've all heard about Paul Wellstone being named the most liberal senator in the entire United States. Well, you know that if we let Van Wynia get elected, he's going to lose his title. What we want is a candidate to run for the Senate who's going to be qualified, electable, dedicated. That's a mainstay of my campaign. You can be sure I've been dedicated. I've been running for well over a year. I was the first candidate out running. I've been across the entire state and still running hard all the way to November. Qualified, well, you make up your own minds on that. You can look at the literature tomorrow and see what the qualifications are in terms of degrees and so on like that. But the most important thing is common sense. And that's what I'm running on, is common sense. And I think then of the three, electability is so important. Others have talked about that, and that is so important. And I tell you that I am the most electable candidate sitting up here tonight. Now I say that because when I started running, the St. Paul paper said, this is a staunch conservative with a moderate style. We want somebody with principles, with conservative principles, but somebody who can reach out to independents and Democrats with a moderate style to win this election. And I'm not a rich man. I'm a common man coming forward. That appeals to both voters. The fact I'm not a rich man can be attested to by people like Laura Carrington and Alan Sue Turch and Hank and so on, who saw me checking into the Super 8 just down the road here. That shows you I'm not rich. It also shows you I'm really conservative. Also, you know, some people say, well, you've never held office before. Well, that's an advantage. You know, Rudy Boschwitz had never held office before he was elected to the Senate, and Dave Durenberger had never held office before he was elected to the Senate, and in fact, neither had Paul Wellstone. So that's an advantage. People don't like incumbents these days. They want somebody new. They want fresh blood. And I have no political baggage. I mean, people, you know, it's a fact of life that when you serve, you pick up baggage, you make votes, and it's a tough way to go. Beyond that, I'm running hard, I'm dedicated, we can put it all together, and we can win in 1994. Thanks a lot.
Well, again, I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight, your patience, your courtesy, and I feel like Karnak has just been given the last envelope, and we're going to get a chance to wrap this up. But I know after 23 years in the media, I have found out in debates like this or panels and forums like this that it's a lot easier to ask the questions than it is to sit here and try to answer them. But I appreciate the opportunity to be here and give it our best shot tonight. Again, I think the question is, who do we want to send to the U.S. Senate? As this panel will, I know, agree, we do not need another liberal Democrat like a Paul Wellstone to represent Minnesota in 1994. So the electability question is the main question. And I believe that I am the best candidate to ensure that we can keep a strong conservative Republican voice in the U.S. Senate for Minnesota beginning in 1995. I need your help and support to do that. Again, with name ID and favorables, I can go into areas and be talking about Republican policies, programs, alternatives, and defining our Democratic opponent, Ann Winia, again, as Doug mentioned, another liberal tax and spend Democrat who will support the Clinton economic and social packages. The others are going to have to spend a lot of time identifying who they are and what their programs are. My leadership in the year and a half I've been in Congress, the voting record that I have that I stand on very proudly, shows you where I am on these issues, what I think is important, and where my votes will fall. So I have a very strong and very proud record in the year and a half I've been in Congress. I need a bigger shovel, as Senator Phil Gramm would say, to do even more for the people of Minnesota from the floor of the U.S. Senate. I need your help, and I need your support to make sure that that happens. We will have a tough race against Ann Winia in 1994. Democrats always put up one heck of a wailing fight, but it's going to take the best candidate on this panel to ensure that we can win. And I believe I am that candidate that can win. I appreciate your support, and I look forward to working with you through November and beyond in Minnesota. Thank you very much.
Better on my feet, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you for having us here tonight. We have been on 3 or 4 of these panels, and I think we've been put through our paces probably harder tonight than anyone in the past. When you're looking at candidates, no doubt you look where we stand on the issues, and you have had an opportunity to view that firsthand tonight. But once you've looked at the issues, I'm asking you to look a little deeper. Look at the background, look at the character, look at the experience, and then look at electability. George McGovern served in office for 24 years. Sometime after he left, he bought an inn in New England. 4 years later, in 1992, after he went bankrupt, he was quoted in the Wall Street Journal as saying, "I wish during the years I was in public office, I'd had this first-hand experience about the difficulties business people face every day. That knowledge would have made me a better U.S. Senator." That's quite an admission for a former liberal senator who had a long record of being anti-business. And that's quite an indictment of his record. Unfortunately, we have conservative office holders who don't have that kind of experience. Too often in the past, we've selected our candidates based on their size, based on their speaking ability, based on their name ID. And we've tended to overlook their background, their character, their experience. And we've overlooked their flaws too. And look what's happened. We've had candidates driven from office by opponents and a liberal media who've exposed their flaws, rightly or wrongly. We've had candidates withdraw as a result of past personal indiscretions which have been exploited by the media. And we've had office holders rejected at the polls because they have breached the public trust. We've had people representing us who have never had the kind of real-life experiences George McGovern was talking about. 18 years of small business experience, ladies and gentlemen. I've owned and operated my own small business. I've negotiated loans, and I've paid them back. Negotiated health care coverage. I've paid my taxes, and I've dealt with overburdensome government regulations. Those are the types of experiences George McGovern was talking about needing after he went bankrupt. And those are the types of things we have to deal with before America goes bankrupt. Some people say that I'm not a dynamic speaker. They say I don't have passion. Some people say I don't have fire in my belly. Some people say my Irish name masks my Norwegian heritage. Well, maybe I'm not the world's greatest speaker, but I do have passion. I have passion about my family, my daughter Christy McKasy out here and her future, passion about America, passion about our party, and about the many blessings that God has given me. And I have passion about wanting to leave my children and their children a better place in which to live. And I have passion about being and wanting to be your U.S. Senator. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, I do want to thank you very much for not only coming out tonight, but also raising some very thoughtful questions and challenging questions. And it would indeed be an honor to serve the people of the 7th District as well as all of the people of the state of Minnesota as your next U.S. Senator. I like to be optimistic, but we have a very real challenge ahead. I would like to be a candidate who would unite our party rather than divide it, who would work as an umbrella and support our candidates all down the line so that we can really make a difference in the House and the legislature. I understand what we're up against. I got acquainted with Paul Wellstone my first year in the state Senate when he was building into the budget a position for himself that was nothing more than political organizing. That man has organized around every radical cause since time began. And if name ID and money deterred him, Rudy Boschwitz would still be our U.S. Senator, and Cal Ludeman would be our 2nd District Congressman. We should not underestimate what that coalition can do. I believe, I'm not ashamed of my experience. I've ran in 7 elections, and I've won 7 elections. And I've never lost an election, and I've won every one with more than 50% of the vote. And I've had a challenging primary as well. I believe that I stand on the principles that most of the people in this state respond to. I've been blessed with a heritage that has developed good character. So I don't think you'll find that there's anything that with any credibility that will bring you shame. I've had opportunities to develop my mind with a good education. I believe I'm up to the challenge of a tough campaign. I don't mind being out in the rural area. I've lived all my life on a farm. I've helped manage a farm. I've lived close to the city, so I can understand and relate to a lot of the challenges that we're facing in the urban areas as well. I believe that I'm a senator that can represent and serve the entire state of Minnesota. For years, I've been putting my family first, but my family is gone, and so now I am free to serve the people of Minnesota. Thank you very much.
As your Lieutenant Governor, I've had the opportunity to travel around the state of Minnesota and to hear how frustrated Minnesotans are with the federal government and the direction that it is taking. How they feel many times that the state and local government is performing in a much more positive manner. And I too thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening to share with you for a few minutes some of my ideas. I want to assure you that as your United States Senator, I would be someone who would listen to you, listen to your concerns, your cares, and bring what is best in Minnesota to Washington. Bring the ideas that we have in Minnesota, the vitality, the strength of Minnesotans to that responsible position. I feel that as we all work together, we will move this country. We will have the opportunity to make changes that are very significant, changes that all of us want to see implemented. But it will only happen if we all work together. It will only happen if we elect the strongest candidate that we have to serve us in the United States Senate. My experiences in government, as a business owner, as someone who grew up in St. James and who worked in my grandfather's store in the city of LaSalle, many of you probably haven't even heard of it because it only has 100 people in that small community. But those experiences, along with my education at Gustavus and at Hamlin, have formed me to be the person that I am. Opportunities have been presented to me. I prepared myself to take advantage of those opportunities and to pursue them. Serving as your United States Senator would be another one of those opportunities. I would be pleased to be able to serve you, and I will remember those things that are most important to you, and will always have that open door to listen to you. Thank you.
Let's have another big hand for all of these people. I have just a couple of other things here before we conclude this evening. One, I'd like to publicly thank Phyllis Onsgaard for helping us put this event together. Please, Phyllis, stand up. I'd like to call Norm Vandervan to the front for just a few moments. He has a statement to make.